Couch Stateside with your host, Val Delaney for CouchFire.co. In this installment, I would like to go over and recap the TUF Premiere. Now, here's just a couple of things. I'm going to go over each fight, the winners, and then at the end of the video, I'm going to pick my top 5 fighters in the house. Now, just a couple of things. First off, this is the first time TUF, the Ultimate Fighter, has been live. Okay, we saw the premiere live, and it was really, the results were great. You know, we had a lot of people tune in to the fights, and you know, there were a lot of good performances as well. A lot of fight bonuses went out. There's just a couple things though. So live is a big deal. We get to see everything unfold live in this season, and it should be an interesting season. Obviously, both coaches, Uriah Faber, Dominic Cruz, will square off at the end of this season, and both fighters will end up coaching these fighters, and ultimately there will be only one Ultimate Fighter of this season. Now, just a couple of things, really. The way FX has done everything, you know, they really, I don't want to say they doled it down, but they explained everything. So for these new viewers, what they did was they explained the 4 main disciplines in MMA, and I think this is good. They explained boxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I think it's a good way to really, if they are new viewers in MMA or trying to tune in and learn MMA, this is good for them to get an idea of how the sport operates. Obviously, there are more disciplines in MMA. There are a lot of different disciplines in MMA, but yes, these are the 4 main disciplines. I think it's a good way for people to learn these disciplines who are trying to get into the sport of MMA. So I think this was a nice touch. A couple things about the premiere, the fights to get into the house, they were 1-round fights. And I think these are both, this is both good and bad. The good is really that, you know, there's a lot of things that could happen in 1 round, and, you know, it gives the fighters a lot of incentive to go all out in this round. And it is good. We get to see a high-octane pace. It's good for the viewers, I guess. The viewers get to see a very good fight, back and forth. Really, there's nothing held back. There's no saving it for the second round. We get to see a lot. But the bad in regards to this is, one, there was incentive for stoppage. That's good, but, you know, things could also happen in the second round. But also, there is bad. If you're trying to judge fighters, you don't get to see cardio of these guys. You don't see if you have a second or third round warrior, a guy who could come out after taking a beating, or who is a late bloomer in fights. You don't get to see that because it's only a 1-round fight. And also, at the same time, you don't get to see the whole fighter. You could see them in 5 minutes of action. It's good, but like I said, there are late bloomers. You don't get to see a whole fighter in 5 minutes. You do get to see a fighter shine, but you also, I just don't think it shows the whole fighter. And like Uriah Faber said, I think this is actually brilliant. What he said is that fighters don't train for 1 round. That's what Uriah Faber said. And I think that's a good quote, really, is that you don't train for 1 round. So it does put fighters out of their comfort zone. So it is difficult for them to perform. But that's just what I took from it. You know, the 1-round fights, we did get to see a lot of action. We did get to see a lot of good fights. I think the premiere fights were unbelievable, really. We got to see a lot of good fights. Now, the first fight of the night was between Proctor and Rinaldi, both very good fighters. And really what ended up happening in this fight, you know, Rinaldi comes out, he presses forward with good striking, and continues to press the pace, continue to press the pace, continue to press the pace. But Proctor stayed very composed in this fight, very composed, you know, blocking the strikes. He did eat a couple of strikes, but Rinaldi ended up falling in between a kick, fell to the mat. Proctor rushed, explosively rushed right at Rinaldi, caught him in a guillotine, and wins the fight via guillotine, via submission, and advances into the house. So Proctor showed very good, he was very composed in this fight, and really, I don't want to say the smarter fighter won this fight, but Proctor capitalized on a very good time, and rushed, got the guillotine, won the fight, goes into the house. The second fight of the night was between Marcelo and Karsten. Now, here's the thing about this fight is that, you know, one is that both fighters are Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters. We're going to see a really good grappling fight, and I think we did, but even though it was very one-sided. Marcelo, now here's the thing about Marcelo. He's trained with Shogun, he's trained with Vanderlei, he's a very experienced fighter in the house. He's 34 years old. But he has a very good resume. He has very good training partners, and it definitely showed in this fight. Marcelo, you know, he landed a big knee in the beginning of the fight. He got full mount, and in the end, you know, he ended up getting the back, and he sunk in a rear naked choke. He showed very, very good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, very good grappling, and patience. That was the best part about this fight. He showed great patience in this fight. He didn't go for the submission right away. He took his time. He landed some strikes from full mount. Then he worked in the submission, and he won rear naked choke, advancing into the house. Marcelo had a very impressive fight, advancing to the house. Now, the next fight, the third fight, which did not last long at all, was Cecilia versus Beach. Cecilia rushed right out. First 8 seconds of the fight, lands a huge right hand and gets the knockout. advances in the house. Cecilia showed a lot of power. You know, it's very, like I said, it's very hard to judge a fighter on a quick knockout. But we're left to think that, you know, Cecilia's got unbelievable knockout power, especially for the division that we're in at lightweight, to be able to knock a guy out with one strike. I don't want to say Beach rushed in, but he got caught. That's the way it works. That's how the game works. It's unfortunate for Beach. Got caught. Cecilia showed great power. That's it. Cecilia advances in the house, wins via knockout. Very impressive performance for Cecilia, even though we didn't get to see much from him. Now, the fourth fight of the night was Tickle versus Lyons. Now, once again, another quick fight that we get to see to get into the house. And we see Tickle, you know, he comes out, good hands. Both guys exchange strikes back and forth, but Tickle lands a big strike. He ends up finishing the fight, wins via knockout 24 seconds into the fight, advances into the house. Tickle, very, very, I don't want to say bright future, but, you know, he showed very good promise, good stand-up in this fight, patience, aggression at the same time. Impressive fight for Tickle. The fifth fight of the night was Weaver versus Ogle. Now, Ogle, the only British guy to advance into the house. Here's a spoiler for you. Ogle does win this fight. Now, the thing about it is that Ogle was on top this in almost the majority of the fight, and Weaver continued multiple triangles, trying to sink Ogle in to the triangle, was not successful in this, and you figure he'd abandon it after a while if it wasn't working. He had very long legs, very long frame. You figure he'd get him caught in. Ogle showed great resolve, started landing some ground and pound. In the end, they actually end up getting stood up. They get stood up, and Weaver went for the kick, and he gets punched by Ogle, and then Ogle rushes right after Weaver, locks in the guillotine choke. The final bell goes off, the final bell buzzes, and in the end, Ogle ends up winning the decision, 10-9, unanimous decision over Weaver. And this makes a lot of sense simply just because Weaver's submissions never materialized into anything. Ogle finished on top, not to mention his guillotine was pretty tight at the end of the fight. Ogle advances in the house, gives Dana White a big hug, wraps his legs around him. Good for him. You know, gets into the house, the TUF house. The sixth fight of the night was Pitchell versus Pfister. Pfister is the youngest guy coming in the house, 21 years old, and we really got to see a lot in this fight. A lot of back and forth stuff, relentless fighting. Pitchell caught Pfister early with some great strikes, really knocking him off of, I don't want to say his game plan, but rocking him pretty good. Pfister was relentless, though. He went right in for the takedown, continued to work, was trying to get him on the mat, and like I said, it was absolutely relentless. But Pitchell stayed composed. I think that was the most impressive part of him. Very composed, and what ended up happening is that Pfister tried to get the back of Pitchell. Pitchell slams Pfister down on the mat, uses ground and pound, cuts open Pfister with some very good ground and pound. In the end, like I said, Pitchell stayed composed. He ended up getting the back of Pfister, worked in the rear naked choke, and won this fight via submission. And Pitchell advances into the house. I was very impressed with Pitchell in this fight. Was very, like I said, very composed, was able to fight off the relentless takedown attempts of Pfister, and ended up working into the back using very, very powerful ground and pound, good elbows, good hands, and won the fight rear naked choke. Impressive fight for Pitchell. The seventh fight of the night was between Glover and Kofor. Now, this fight was, I don't want to say so much back and forth, but I don't think there's much really to say about this fight, is that Kofor won this fight 10-9 unanimous decision, and it was due to relentless takedowns and lots of grappling. It was stood up at times. Glover was trying to egg Kofor into a stand-up battle with taunting, and it never really materialized that. He did catch Kofor a couple of times, but in the end, Kofor's takedowns were relentless. He was able to control most of the round and won this fight 10-9 unanimous decision, advancing into the house. I don't think the most memorable fight for grapplers and wrestlers. I guess you could say it was a good fight, but I'd like to see what Kofor can do in a fight with a guy who is just as good of a grappler as him. Now, the eighth fight of the night was Saunders versus Hackett, and this was, I don't want to say a high-octane fight, but there was a lot that was going on in this fight. What ended up happening, good stand-up. Saunders ends up sinking in a tight guillotine submission early on in the fight, and he went all out for it. He went all in, using all of the strength. Faber and Dominic Cruz, Dana White all said that the guy's going to be gassed the rest of the fight. He ends up not getting it. And the thing that happens is that, you know, the fight gets back on its feet. Saunders looks exhausted. You could see his fatigue in this fight. But the thing is that Hackett never really capitalized on Saunders being tired. He never did, and that's actually what Faber and Cruz were saying during this, is that capitalize, go and rush at him if he's tired. If there is a weakness, you go on the offensive. But that never happened. Saunders actually ended up getting back in his, was put on his back by Hackett. He tried to sink in another very tight guillotine submission. It would have been interesting. That's the fight ended. And by Saunders sinking in the guillotine. I think 5 more seconds, he actually might have had Hackett in the submission. This one was very tight, tighter than the first one. But the fight went to decision. Saunders won 10-9 via unanimous decision, advances into the house. Like to see what he could do with this guillotine. Hats off to Hackett. I mean, not the most impressive fight, but he was able to fight off a very tight guillotine submission in this fight. But Saunders advances into the house. The 9th fight of the night was Vick versus Cochran. Now this was, I don't know, I mean, Vick comes in, you know, he's a boxer before this. He's very new to the game of MMA. Dakota Cochran, you know, with everything surrounding him, with everything going into this, with, you know, his background before he got into mixed martial arts, all that drama, you know, no big deal. In the end, I don't want to say this was the most entertaining fight. You know, Cochran was very relentless. Obviously, he's not going to fight a boxer on his feet. Very relentless with his takedowns. Very, very relentless. But he couldn't get anything out of this. Vick was able to withstand his takedowns. Actually tried to get Cochran a couple of locks, a couple of submissions, but that never ended up happening. And at the end of the fight, Cochran actually did end up on top of this fight, but he didn't come out on top in the end. Is that Vick ended up winning this fight via split decision 10-9. And I could say this was a close fight, is that Cochran was pressing the pace for the majority of the fight. He did finish the fight on top, but like I said, his takedowns really didn't materialize in anything. This one could have gone both ways. It's unfortunate. Dakota Cochran's a good fighter, but Vick will advance into the house. We'd like to see his boxing. We never really got to see much of it, so like to see what happens with Vick. Hopefully Cochran lands on his feet. The 10th fight of the night was Vicente versus Chiesa. Very tough name to pronounce. Chiesa, this was a very quick fight. Chiesa with an explosive takedown to start up the fight. Very good ground and pound, very heavy strikes. Was able to get the back of Vicente, and he sunk in a rear naked choke to win this fight and advance into the house. We're seeing a lot of submission victories in these fights, a lot of good grapplers, a lot of good wrestlers. I was very impressed with Chiesa in this fight. He wasted no time, came right out, got the takedown. It wasn't just, you know, he didn't work for it. It was really just boom, right in, got him down, got Vicente down on his back, and wasted no time. He was really pushing the pace when he was on the ground and was able to work and get the submission. So Chiesa advances into the house with a submission victory. The 11th fight of the night was Rio versus McLean. Now, we kind of like the last fight with Chiesa. You know, we saw some good takedowns. There was a couple strikes in the beginning, but Rio ended up getting a very explosive takedown against McLean. And, you know, McLean, they stood up, they stand up. McLean actually gets up off his back, but Rio gets the slam and gets him back down the mat, gets McLean down to the mat, and Rio gets the back and wins rear naked choke. He wins via submission, rear naked choke. We see 2 submission victories back to back, 2 good grapplers. And that was the thing also that, you know, Rio was, you know, his takedowns were explosive as well. Chiesa and Rio, I don't want to say they're very similar fighters. I mean, they both do have long hair. I think they referred to Rio looking a lot like Clay Guida. But, you know, I was impressed with Rio and his, he was composed. He took his time with his takedown. He picked his spots. He ended up getting the submission victory. The 12th fight of the night, we have Lawrence versus Krause. Now, this was a good fight. I mean, one-sided. You know, I know James Krause is a very experienced fighter. He's a very good fighter. But, man, Justin Lawrence came out in this fight, a man on a mission. The guy trains at Black House. He trains with Anderson Silva. Unbelievable kicks and striking. The pace that he pushed in this fight. You know, in the beginning, Lawrence lands huge kicks and actually gets Krause on a takedown. He lands heavy ground and pound. It wasn't even patient. He was just landing heavy strikes, relentless strikes, and the pace that Lawrence was pushing. But Krause got back up on his feet, but in the end, Lawrence ended up landing a left hook, sent Krause down to the mat. He got in a few shots until the referee broke up the fight. Lawrence won this fight, defeats James Krause via TKO, and a very impressive performance by Justin Lawrence. You know, showing us, you know, I mean, definitely one of the front runners going into this house with impressive striking and a pretty formidable ground game. So Justin Lawrence advances in the house, defeats James Krause via TKO. The 13th fight of the night was Cruikshank versus Dober. Now, this is a back-and-forth fight, a lot of takedowns, good stand-up. Cruikshank's a very big guy. In the beginning, he used it and established his range landing some big kicks. Dober ended up going for the takedown, and he was relentless, and he ended up getting the takedown. But Cruikshank, he gets back up, and he gets a takedown of his own, and then the two exchange takedowns back and forth. Okay, Cruikshank gets the takedown, Dober gets the takedown, and Cruikshank gets the takedown. A lot of back and forth takedowns and grappling. We get to see a lot between the two guys. At the end of the fight, Cruikshank locks in a guillotine, and the time runs out. It goes to decision. Cruikshank wins via unanimous decision, 10-9. Definitely a rightful score. It was very back and forth. Cruikshank landed the strikes when he did, and he did get more takedowns in the end. But Dober was relentless. Like I said, impressive fight for both guys. It could go both ways, but Cruikshank was very impressive in this fight. Now, the 14th fight of the night was Larson versus Smith. And this was a mixture of both. There was grappling, there was stand-up, there was a little bit of everything in this fight. And the thing is that Larson fought off top in this fight for the majority of the fight, and Smith was fighting off his back, and he was attempting submissions off his back the majority of the fight. Multiple submissions. It wasn't the same one like in the Weaver fight that we saw, but multiple submission attempts. But Larson was successful at defending these ones off, and he worked some pretty good ground and pound. I don't want to say too much of it, but he was able to fend off the submissions and maintain a dominant position the entire fight, or a majority of the fight. And this one went to the judges. Larson won this fight, unanimous decision, 10-9, simply just because Smith couldn't get any of his submissions really he couldn't work in a submission. He did try multiple attempts, but like I said, Larson was able to fend them off. The 15th fight of the night was TUF versus Iaquinta. Now, Iaquinta comes in, he trains with Sarah in New York, and pretty impressive fight for Iaquinta. Iaquinta scored 2 takedowns in this fight, very impressive takedowns. He worked and he was very smart with them. And also, he got the better of the striking, too. Iaquinta got the better of the striking against TUF, and he had very good leg kicks, good hands. He was able to land his strikes. Like I said, he fought a very smart fight. And in the midst of this fight, TUF ends up breaking his toe. Absolutely gruesome stuff. But you know, a tough guy. He fought through it the entire fight. Favored, Cruz, Dana White, they all noticed it during the fight, commentating about it, actually got the viewers to focus in on it more than the actual fight. It was actually hard to not focus on the fight and not notice TUF's toe being broken. But this one ended up going to the judges with the multiple takedowns and, I don't want to say the dominant stand-up, but getting the best of the stand-up. Iaquinta won this fight via unanimous decision, won at 10-9. Definitely a rightful decision. Iaquinta pretty much, I don't want to say dominated the fight, but got the best of TUF in this fight. Came out with no injuries as well. Hopefully, TUF's toe heals just fine. The last fight of the night was Jury versus Areola. And this was very one-sided fight. You know, Areola's got very good stand-up. Jury, we know him, he had to drop out of a past TUF season with Dos Santos and Lesnar. He had to drop out due to injury. He's undefeated coming into this, and Jury really showed us how dominant a ground game he does have with relentless takedowns, great ground control, was able to control Areola. The fight kept getting stood up and back down on the ground. Areola kept trying to land these big kicks, but Jury was relentless, got the takedowns. This one ended up going to the judges, and Miles Jury won this fight 10-9 unanimous decision due to great grappling, very good ground control. Areola, you know, he got rid of Areola's good striking game. That's ended up what happening, and that's what a good fighter does. He gets rid of a fighter's strengths, and that's exactly what Jury did in this fight. So those are the 16 fights that ended up happening in the TUF Premiere. That's the recap, the best I can do it. And what I'd like to do in the last part of this video is go over my top 5 fighters in the house right now. So this is no particular order. This isn't ranking them 1 to 5 at all. These are just the 5 that I think, based on my own reason, that I'm going to give you. My first fighter that I think is a top fighter in the house is definitely Justin Lawrence. Came out against James Krause, a very smart and good fighter, experienced fighter, and he made very quick work of this smart and experienced fighter with very good stand, very dynamic, you know, with his leg kicks, his hands, you know, able to get the takedowns. He showed us how he's not a one-dimensional fighter, and we know he has a formidable ground game, you know, and training at Black House only adds this. Justin Lawrence pushes a high-octane pace. He is very quick, and he has good power in his hands and his legs. Like I said, dynamic striker. He gives you multiple looks. Justin Lawrence is one. My next one is Miles Jury. Miles Jury showed us a very dominant ground game with good ground control. It wasn't against one of the best, I don't want to say one of the best grapplers. I don't think Areola was one of the best. That's just my honest opinion on this. I don't think Areola was one of the best grapplers, but Miles Jury showed us how dominant he was. He was able to get rid of Areola's striking and show dominant ground control, good ground and pound, and really just dominant grappling. So Miles Jury is definitely up on that list. and once again, he's undefeated. My next fighter is Vince Pitchell. Now, most people wouldn't say that Pitchell's a top fighter, but what I saw from Pitchell, he's a tough guy. You know, Pfister was relentless, and Pitchell was calm, collected in this fight, and he was able to fight off many takedown attempts. He was able to slam Pfister down to the ground. He was able to implement ground and pound, and then in the end, he was able to work in a submission. Very calm and collected fighter, but explosive at the same time. He really picked his spots, showed good ground and pound. He showed great hands in the beginning, was able to catch Pfister early on, and impressive fight. So I just think Pitchell is the whole package. He may not have the best of ground games. We didn't get to see too much. We got to see him fight off Pfister and see how relentless Pfister was. But Pitchell showed great resolve and was able to fight off and end up working the finish with good ground and pound, good submission attempt. My next fight we didn't get to see a lot of, Sam Sicilia, simply just because of his knockout power. I think there's a lot of promise when a lightweight can knock out a guy with one punch. That's very impressive. We see a lot of lightweight battles. These lighter guys, we see them getting a lot of battles they could take a hit. Now, I'm not saying that Beach's chin is questionable. I'm just saying that Sicilia has power that cannot be denied. The guy is also undefeated. He's a very young talent. I personally have him up there just because of the knockout power for the division. That's why I have Sam Sicilia up there. And lastly, my last fighter who's on my top 5 list is Cristiano Marcelo. The guy is experienced. You know, he's one of the older guys in the house. He's 34 years old. But you cannot deny his unbelievable ground skill and his good stand-up. Not to mention, his experience is a big factor. The people he is trained with, you know, the Shoguns, the Vanderlei Silvas, there's no denying that. So Marcelo is definitely a promising fighter for the TUF House. So those are the recap of the TUF Premiere, and those are my top 5 fighters in the TUF House. Hopefully, you know, we get to see a good season of fights. Hopefully the live premieres and the live fights end up working out well for us. And that's what I have for this edition of Cage Side Couch. This is Kyle Delaney signing off. I'm out of here.